Welcome everybody to Radiator Comics Studio. My name is Neil Brideau. My pronouns are he, him. I run Radiator Comics, which distributes self-published and small press comics. Radiator Comics Studio is a series of online programs and print publications that are designed to support the community of cartoonists in South Florida and to connect it with the national comics scene. Radiator Comics Studio is supported by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, and we're grateful for their support. We are broadcasting today from Miccosukee land. The people from whom the land was stolen are still here and are still caring for this place. It's also important to acknowledge the history of African-American, Bahamian, Haitian, and other Caribbean people whose labor made South Florida what it is today. We have a lifelong responsibility to be better neighbors to the people and places where we're located and to work to dismantle white supremacy. Expressing one's ideas and feelings through comics and zines can be really powerful. And one of our hopes with programming like today's is to make those tools of expression more accessible. So thank you for joining us today. I'm thrilled to be able to host my friend Sage Coffey. They will be talking about pricing your comics, the psychology of sales, and table etiquette at comics festivals. I'm going to share my screen real quick as I introduce Sage. Sage Coffey is a trans non-binary cartoonist living in Chicago, Illinois. Sage has been published in the Washington Post, the Nib, and the New Yorker. On top of their political autobio comics, Sage loves to make original mini comics about drunk ghosts and snakes with legs. They love their cats, orange blossom tea, and watching wrestling. In addition to that, Sage is also one of the organizers for the Chicago Alternative Comics Expo, also known as CAKE, and of the publisher and editor of Sweaty Palms anthology, comics anthology about anxiety. So they are coming to this presentation from a bunch of different angles and perspectives. Yeah, I'm super excited about this. Very happy to host it. Welcome, Sage. I'm going to hand the event over to you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So much. Yeah. I'm definitely coming from, like Neil said, a lot of different perspectives of sales, not just my own mini comics, but anthologies as well. And we are going to jump right into the presentation part. We are going to start with the math portion, just to kind of get it out of the way. Just because math is it's really hard. I'm not a math-oriented person generally, so figuring out these equations really helped just sales in general. It helped me not look at negatives in my bank account. Accessibility and accessible pricing is always a priority for me. But so is not going completely broke while making comics, right? It's important to take care of our audiences as well as ourselves. And that's kind of what this is about. So first we're going to go over finding the cost per unit. Now, when I say unit means mini comic, anthology. Unit is whatever you're selling. So you're going to be adding your fixed costs, like your total fixed cost plus your total variable costs divided by total units produced. So fixed costs are like the print company telling you, hey, this is how much a book costs to make, right? You can't really be like, oh, well, I'm only going to pay half of that to the print company, right? Or, the cost of paper at Staples or the cost of risograph printing. These are costs that are out of your control, that are not going to change at all during the production of the book. Versus variable costs. Variable costs can be shipping materials, it can be shipping. It can be maybe you have a mini comic that has two different types of paper for the cover or something. those can be variable depending on what you're buying them from, right? So an example would be $30,000 fixed cost plus $25,000 variable costs divided by 5,000 units. So that's, you know, fixed cost making the book. And these are high numbers because I'm going at this through like a Kickstarter perspective. This example would be like for a larger anthology like Sweaty Palms. So the 30,000 fixed cost would be paying contributors. It would be printing the book. And that would be the bulk of the fixed cost right there. Variable costs, you know, shipping, stuff like that, like I said earlier, divided by 5,000 units. So we're having 5,000 units of Sweaty Palms made equals 11 per unit. So each individual book of Sweaty Palms is being made for $11. Okay. Next, we're going to be finding out our profit margin. So profit margin is how much profit you're making per unit sold. Units can be books, mini comics, figurines, etc. Again, it could even be something smaller like stickers. All this does change your number. So subtract the cost of the individual product or unit from the sales price of the item. So I sell Sweaty Palms for $25. Minus, I put 10 here, but it's 11. Minus 10, that was our production cost, remember? So I have a $15 profit per unit sold. To figure out the percentage of per unit, just divide the sales price of the item from the profit margin. So you would divide the 25 and the 15. So you see I have a profit of 60%. This is one reason why, you know, there are certain trends that you'll see in conventions, like enamel pins were, you know, and still are huge. It's because they have a very high profit margin. You know, you can get an enamel pin for like maybe $2 a pop and sell them for $10 a pop. That's a high profit margin. Next, we're going to go over finding out how many units sold to quote unquote break even. So this was the math problem that me and my partner had to go over again and again, because it's surprisingly hard to find online. But it is cost of total units. So your overall like production cost for everything divided by your sales price. And that equals the number of units that need to be sold in order to make back the initial cost of what you spent to have that done. So that in example, say you made, you know, you spent 20,000 on production and you sell each book for 25 each. 800 copies of that book need to be sold in order to equal the cost of what it took to make all of them. And then the rest is profit. I know math is confusing, so if anybody wants me to go back so you can screenshot it, let me know. I know we're going over this part a little fast. But yeah. Play with these numbers for price accessibility. This would result in smaller profit margins. Honestly, the way I personally look at price is once I spend the money on production, that money is gone. That money is disappeared into production land. And, you know, especially for things like Wine Ghost, which are 16-page minis, my profit margins are very, very small. But it's because I want risographed comics to be more accessible, right? For me personally, it is worth having less money go to me directly to get the book into the hands of more people. That being said, something relatively new that's being done is pay it forward publishing. It's something I'm really, really interested in seeing how it goes. Luke Kruger Howard is offering free books with a pay it forward option. Basically, you pay the print cost of the book to have somebody else get it for free. It's something I've never seen before. I think that's really, really awesome. Of course, Luke will be seeing a really, really tiny profit margin from that, depending on how generous the people who are contributing to this are. But it's something I've personally never seen before, and I think it's really awesome. If you want to check out that or contribute to it, go to goesbooks.com. Does anyone have any questions about the math portion before we move on to sales psychology at the table? Opening up for math questions.
I've got a question, Sage.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, is that sweet?
Do some I know different folks have different criteria as to what constitutes a worthwhile profit margin in terms of let me figure out how to phrase this. Do you have a different criteria for what your profit margin is going to be if you are intending to create more of something versus if you have completed the run and it's going to, and that's going to be it? Like if there's a Wine Ghost mini that you make, does profit margin, does that make a difference? I guess I should say, if you're thinking about, am I going to restock this down the road by creating more? Does that affect how you price?
So Wine Ghost is an interesting example because I did print them for free. I just bought the paper. Essentially, I had access to a risograph at the time through Bad Press for bad books, which is unfortunately no longer around. So at the time, I was pricing Wine Ghost of the cost per book, essentially. Plus $1, I think, was my my profit margin on that. And I go in almost every print run assuming that I will sell at least 150. So I do print runs of 150 for everything. And then if I sell more than that, I'm like, okay, second print run of 150, and we go from there. I definitely don't anticipate the success of a series. Like Wine Ghost is a great example of this because I never thought anybody would like Wine Ghost. When I finished that book, I was like, oh, this is the worst thing I've ever made. No one's gonna pick this up, but I had fun making it, so whatever. And like printing any original mini comic, I feel like is going to be a risk, because you're only selling yourself, and especially like at the time that I made Wine Ghost, I was only published by the Nib at that point. I didn't really have as much print cred as I do now. But it's really like, how much did you love working on a project? I feel like that is whether or not you want to invest more into it. Because I feel like personally, if you love something, it will show in the work and people will see that love and be attracted to it. So anticipated success is not something that I include in my profit margins at all. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah.
Pal, yes.
Hi. When it comes to like in the fixed cost, you mentioned printing, kind of the print cost. How much? And pardon me if this is something kind of Googleable.
No, it's
I mean,
okay.
how much could that fixed cost vary depending on sort of the style, the method you're putting into it. Like, have you ever made a comic and then decide, oh, I might have to go back and redo it in black and white to cut down on print cost because of length, or kind of is there a wide variability there, or
there is, especially like when printing in color, you're going to see a significant increase in your fixed cost. And one way to kind of combat that, especially if you're doing tones, like a one tone book, is offset printing, where you have black and then one tone. This works with risograph printing as well, where you have this one tone, you can add a variable of black or white to that one tone to achieve a really, really wide range of tones, right? That's kind of one way to save on it. If that way you don't have to pay for full color printing for one tone. Definitely do your research on different print methods to see what would work best for your project. Digital printing versus offset printing versus risograph printing versus, there are so many methods. Yeah, it can vary a lot, especially depending on the size of your project. Things like paper quality can affect your overall fixed prices, right? There is a difference in Sweaty Palms Volume 1. This sort of like kind of rough paper with no gloss, it's uncoated, is very different than this paper, which is semi-gloss. I'm not sure how well you can see that in my camera. But yeah, those things like paper quality, whether or not you have printing on the interior of your cover, things like that will all change your fixed costs. It's really important to work with whoever your printer is to find out what works best for your budget. That being said, going to places like Staples and Office Max are great for like really short runs of things. That's actually how, if it were socially acceptable, the mini comic I made that's at Radiator Comics was printed at Staples, like straight up. But do a little research. Odds are, like, you probably have a Minuteman press in your town. They're national now. Or, a smaller press chain. And a lot of times they'll have a lot better prices for bulk mini making. For things like Perfect Bound. Perfect Bound is like this, where it's glued. Looking at bigger print companies like Marquise or Print Ninja, or there are so many different print companies that do perfect binding. But yeah, really it's just doing the research to find what print company will work best for your budget.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, we ready for the next section?
I think so. There is one helpful comment that was just posted in the chat by Tori, pointing out that some printers will use will have calculators on their website where you can sort of play around, where you can figure out, oh, well, what if I change the weight of the paper that I'm using, or what if I do color versus black and white? And those can be helpful.
Something that I've also found helpful is looking at companies that don't advertise that they print comics. I know that seems weird, but at the end of the day, a book is a book, regardless of its content. And I have personally had a lot more luck with companies that primarily print books. They tend to be more fairly priced than companies that specify that they print comics. For example, like Kablam Comics is for some reason much more expensive than just printing your stuff at Staples, or, you know, going to a local book printer. I go to Lincoln Square Printing. That's over by the Brown Line, Western Brown Line stop. And it's just a tiny print company run by two brothers, which is so cute, right? Like, support local businesses, little print companies as well, if you're able to. I acknowledge, like, not every town has one, but if your town does, do your research, find out. Okay, we will. Is it just me now? Sorry, I've never done shared screen, so I'm trying to stop sharing the screen. Haha, okay, we're back. But okay, so moving on to the psychology of sales. Sales etiquette is very, very important. I feel like majority of my sales come from in-person conventions and stuff like that. It's really, really, really important to have a good presence at your table, right? You want to be welcoming. You want to be non-threatening. I feel like something I see a lot is like carnival barking at the audience, right? Or, you know, passers-by. And for a lot of people, that can be very, very intimidating. It's important to be considerate of other people's limits, as far as, like, keep in mind that with everything going on around them, they're probably overwhelmed. So even if somebody looks at your table, just waving hi, you know, or a silent, like, nodding gesture, making eye contact if that's something you're comfortable with. Very, very simple, welcoming gestures to say, hey, my table is open to you if you want to come here. That hopefully will draw more people into your table. A lot of people are also very shy when it comes to physically touching books, right? And especially right now with COVID, you know, this advice may change depending on what the future of conventions looks like. So I want all of you to keep that in mind. This is typically how I've done it in the past, pre-COVID times. But I would invite people to say, hey, feel free to pick up and look through things. You know, a lot of people, even if you have something clearly on display, are unsure whether or not they're allowed to touch things. If you want to keep somebody from reading your whole comic at the table, which I know is something probably a lot of us has experienced, putting a little paper clip or something on your display copy to cut off a certain amount of pages will help prevent that. I've definitely had somebody read the whole of If It Were Socially Acceptable in front of me and go, ugh, and put it down. Yeah, it's really disheartening when somebody, like, reads a whole comic, takes up that table space, and, you know, sometimes that prevents other people from coming to your table. Oh no, Tori, I'm so sorry. Somebody ripped it off. That's terrible. Yeah, definitely make sure it's very, very secure. Even if, you know, on that paper clip, put a little note, say, like, you know, past this point, please. If you've read up to this point, maybe you're interested, or, you know, something like that. Or please don't remove this clip. Any little personal note you want to put in there to prevent somebody from physically taking off the clip. I'm so sorry that happened to you. That being said, also, I feel like a lot of us inherently in our own personal work have a color palette that we generally stick to. If you look at pictures of my table setups, I tend to have lots of yellows and pinks. Make sure your tablecloth complements those colors, right? if you have a lot of really busy work and busy covers, you don't want the busiest pattern possible as your tablecloth. That can be really, really overwhelming to the eye. You might want to go with a more simple pattern, or even, something that's very bold, like bold stripes. That being said, if you have a very, very simple series of covers, maybe you're one of those people who focuses more on typography or focus more on like one singular illustration on your covers. Having a more complicated tablecloth is perfectly fine. Just make sure it doesn't clash with your cover colors, if that makes sense. Looking very coordinated is very nice. I'm sure at conventions you've passed tables that are like, ooh, I don't know about that one, or, oh, that's a beautiful table. Like that, those reactions that you get are the same thing, like same reactions that people get walking past your table. With that in mind, have things on your table that represent you. One of my favorite things that Rosemary O'Connell does, Rosemary Valero O'Connell, is she puts a little Cupid to show like, hey, this is a thing that I like. Like this is, something that brings her comfort. It's something that makes her table more approachable. And, even if you want to incorporate it in your design, like say you have a business card holder, having a little drawing of you or something like that, presenting, like saying, hey, these are business cards, feel free to take one. There are so many ways, different ways to make your space more inviting. I would advise against music personally. I feel like that can be intrusive on your table neighbors as well, as contribute to the overwhelming nature of a convention. You would be surprised. A lot of people play music. But yeah, and also, make sure your cash box is secure, or like fanny pack. You can never go wrong with a fanny pack. Making sure you have your square or card reader in a place where you know exactly where it is. Having a little space to hide your water or hide your food and stuff is really good because it makes your table seem more clean. Me personally, I have a stand, a little breakdownable stand for all my comics on one side, and then in the front I will put my non-comic things, so like stickers and prints and stuff like that. If you have a wall behind you, which you can't always count on a convention, utilize that wall. Put your prints back there with very clear like prints or price tag next to them. Making sure people know like, hey, this is part of my space, not just the convention space. Having a price list. There are two ways to go about prices. You can either have a singular list that's what I do. I do a singular list where people can kind of look at it like a menu where they'll be like, oh, okay. Or you can have price tags, clearly marked price tags next to every comic. I personally think if you want to go the price tag route, make sure they are big, make sure they are legible. And the dollar store sells those, like, you often see them at like yard sales and stuff like that, those big neon ones. If you go that route, have some more neon on your table somewhere that isn't on the price tags, just so you can, again, like draw in that color palette. Psychology wise, I found out that, so, and this is gonna sound kind of like a little cuckoo bananas, but stay with me. So humans like to make even numbers. I don't remember why this is, but it's worked for me at every convention where I will place things in either groups of 3 or groups of 5 on display with it like clearly being like, okay, here is a display of 3 comics next to each other, 5 comics next to each other, depending on my table space, of course. And people will pick it up just so their brain will be like, okay, it's even now. And that will inspire them to look through it and see like whether or not they like it. And I know that sounds really, really strange, but I promise you, so weirdly it works. Also knowing whether or not to speak to somebody while they're looking through something. If they are looking through it a little bit and maybe have looked through it for a while and are about to put it down, talk about the rest of the story, like sales pitch it a little bit. You should have an elevator pitch for all your comics where it's like 1 or 2 sentences to describe the comic. It's up to you whether or not to spoil it. With certain comics, I feel like it's beneficial to. With other comics, I feel like it's not. If It Were Socially Acceptable is a comic where a little snake with legs is expressing things that they wish they could do, and slowly it gets more and more morose. So like if somebody picks up and reads the first 2 pages, they might not be interested. So in that case, I would go into, oh, it gets more dark as you read it. It has this tone that goes into this tone, and that would be considered a spoiler traditionally, right? But that will change the reader's perspective on what they've read thus far, because they're like, oh, well, how does it get darker? That combined with the preview, like putting the paperclip or anything on it, will, I feel, help a sale a lot. Other ones, I feel like it's more beneficial just to give a general premise. For Wine Ghost specifically, Wine Ghost often gets like a little existential near the end. But I'll say, oh, in this one, she helps a girl get out of a bad date. And it's like, oh, okay, that sounds fun enough. With like this character premise. And hopefully people will pick it up. Of course, remember, you can't force a sale on somebody. If somebody isn't interested, understand and accept that. Maybe encourage them to take a business card if they are interested in your work. Like I said earlier, accessibility is very, very important to me. So I personally have all of my comics free to read online. That being said, maybe including, like, depending on the size of your project, a 5 to 10 page preview on your website, or even like a 3-page preview if it's a really short project. Just so, it gives people the opportunity to engage with your work, even if they can't afford it. Any questions thus far? No?
While we're waiting to see if anybody has any questions, I had a question.
Yes.
And that is like, is there anything that you've seen on somebody's table that like has really surprised you and been like, wow, what a great idea, like as a way of like getting people either interested in the comics or like actually like making those sales?
So I don't personally do this, just because I don't have much. I always get half tables, so I have like a very limited amount of space. But I've seen people display their works not on like little shelves or anything, but using things that are related to what the story is related to. So Luke Kruger Howard, who I know I mentioned earlier, but he did this really, really clever thing where he has a Candace, yes, that makes sense. I will get to it. So he had an old rotary phone that physically held up a book of his, and then had a stack in front of the rotary phone. That way, people wouldn't pick up the one on the rotary phone and kind of mess up that display. I thought that was so clever because it was clearly related to the cover, because there was a rotary phone motif on the cover. And the color palette was similar. The book itself was red, white, and pink, and the rotary phone was bright pink. So automatically, like, having that bright color definitely drew in my eye. It being something related to the cover drew me in, because I was like, oh, what's this about? That like there's a physical presence to it. You know, it was a really, really interesting way to display a book. And I really love stuff like that. You know, even like having Ivy Adams had a little Pinky and Pepper modified dolls that she would have like going like this to her copies of Pinky and Pepper Forever. Schweitzer actually has, who's in the audience, has this absolutely huge wall of prints. Like it looks like he's in a little house of prints. But all of them are very, very clearly displayed and organized, or they look organized to me at least. And you know, that playing with height is another way to draw people to your table, right? Like I am a short person, I am a tiny person, so a display like that would swallow me up. I wouldn't be visible. So I do like a half and half. I do half my books are tall, the rest is flat, so you can see me. I feel that like having your presence be very visible is really important. Yes. But yeah, what was the question in the chat?
So the question in the chat from Candace is, do you have recommendations for showing your work on your website?
Yes. So I use myportfolio.com. It actually comes with Photoshop and the Adobe Suite. If you're somebody who has the Adobe Suite, it is surprisingly much easier than Squarespace, and actually like cheaper relatively, depending on how you view the use of Adobe products. Yeah, I just include everything in individual photo galleries. So I'll have a project, what the project is in text above it, a photo gallery below it, and that photo gallery will be the individual pages for that project. I tend to organize my stuff as like, here's illustration, and have all my illustrations again separated by like, here's what the project was, here are all the illustrations for that project. You know, even if you have like a sketchbook section, like here's my sketchbook, here's all the little sketchbook sketches that I want to show off as part of my portfolio. For comics, I have it separated into subcategories. So I have them separated by Wineghost, because Wineghost is a series at this point. Personal comics, which will be like any personal comics that are not in a series, and then professional comics. And in those professional comics, same thing, I'll have, here's the things I did for the Washington Post, and then like 3 beginning panels, and then a link to where you can read it. Same thing with my New Yorker comics, same thing with a lot of the anthologies I've done. If you contribute to a lot of anthologies, check your contracts. You actually may be able to print those completed comics as mini comics of your own, depending on how much time has passed. Yeah, it's important to read your contracts no matter what, honestly. Always read your contracts, but yeah, also read like accessibility and the paperclip method. Even if you just want to do like only the first 3 pages up until like the last 2 pages or something, you can put the paperclip wherever you want. It's just, you know, how much you want to give the audience, right? That is within your control as a creator.
I think there might actually be a follow-up to that question in the chat about like how, like showing your comics, but then making sure that it's secure, that like you're, you know, like you're giving these comics, like you're displaying them for free. Like what about like risks of people taking them from your website?
Oh, you mean for like art theft, like people taking them, physically taking them?
I think that might be what they meant, was like kind of like, you know, just that the danger of like, you know, what if somebody not physically takes them, but like, you know, steals the imagery or like downloads your entire comic from.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, especially if it's something very long. It's hard to say. You can upload it to Gumroad for a pay what you want price. A lot of people will maybe put 0 or something like that, and then enable a watermark on every download. And what that does is it puts their email that they purchased it from, the time and date that they purchased it. Yeah. Yeah, and it's difficult because it really depends on you know how much you want to reveal, right? Like, so if you have a longer piece of work, say you have like a 200-page graphic novel or something, and you know you don't want to post 200 pages, that's perfectly fine. Like, that's perfectly acceptable. Just put, you know, first 5 pages, first, you know, 3 pages, something to just give them a little taste of what to expect. And yeah, I know it's harder for, I think a rubber band might work, or a ribbon, like a hot gluable ribbon to put don't physically glue it to the book, of course, but you know, having a defined, like, this is the sample copy. Some, like, one copy that you don't mind if it gets a little beat up during con season. Digitally speaking, whatever you would send to a website for like a preview, I would say is acceptable to have on your website without fear of it being stolen. As far as imagery is concerned, like, I feel like you really can't copyright individual page layouts. I feel like in a certain way, it's fruitless just because there will be a lot of people coming up with the same thing unknowingly. A great example is Sweaty Palms, actually. Oh, okay. Yes. Okay, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, because at the same time that the Sweaty Palms anthology was going on, another anthology was also being kickstarted called Invisible Illnesses, which was also all about anxiety. And both of us as a project went about it in such completely different ways that we both got funded. Like, it was absolutely fine. We actually ended up trading. I contacted her and I was like, hey, do you want a copy of Sweaty Palms? Yeah. So you don't need to worry about like posting, especially for a longer project, posting the whole thing. It's really up to you. If you do want to offer more accessible prices for something on an online store or, you know, in digital spaces, offering sliding scale. Again, Gumroad has like a pay what you want type of thing. You can actually set a limit. Instead of 0, you could be like $15 plus, so they can pay however much they want, with a minimum of $15. I also believe you can do that with Store Envy, but you do it in a weird way where it's like offering variants. And it's definitely strange. But yeah, there are definitely ways to offer those preview pages without fear of the whole of a larger project being stolen. Oh, really? I didn't know Itch.io could do that now too. I'm so used to Itch.io as a game space. I'm still not used to it being a comic space. But yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of crossover, and all these like booth tips can be used concurrently between comics booths. If you're going to CXT, like animation booths, game booths, no matter the convention, always prioritize, you know, visibility, making sure all your products are visible and their names are visible, right? You don't want to have your comics overlapping each other, prints overlapping each other too much. Because then people can miss the title, people can potentially knock things over. You know, specifying what's free and what's not. You'd be surprised at how many people ask if my business card is free. The answer is always yes. And some people actually get a little anxious taking business cards out of a business card holder. Depending on the type of convention you're in, like if it's something more like Fluke Athens, or a more casual indie convention or zine show, not having a business card holder at all, just having them like on your table, a little bit splayed out, people just pick them up as they walk by. If it's a show that you feel is more of like a, okay, I gotta like button down and be more professional, but like, you know, in a comics way. So it's not the most professional, but it's, you know, more professional. Y'all know what I mean. Maybe that's, you know, business card holder time. You kind of have to read the audience of the show a little bit. I was really, really surprised going into VanCaf, which is Vancouver Arts Festival, because it is surprisingly a little more formal than, say, an SPX or a CXC. But yeah, gauge your audience. I know it's hard to like predict that. But yeah, same thing with like whether or not somebody wants to be talked to. If somebody's not making a lot of eye contact, just coming through things, very quiet, doesn't say hello, you know, maybe it's best not to talk to that person and just give them a friendly like, oh, you know, I hope you like this, rather than engage in a full conversation. Yes, Andrew.
Hi, Sage. Thanks so much. It's been really good. I want to kind of circle back around to psychology, because you talked
Yes.
about the handling of books, which I totally believe, because Apple does that with the screens in their stores. Like they make it. So
Oh,
you have
really?
to-
I didn't know that.
They make it so that you will have to touch it so you can see it, and you're like whatever percent more likely to buy something. So, but I wanted to, because I've kind of thought about this for years, and I wanted to just put it out there and see if you can confirm or deny or share your experience with like the thought about pricing your books. So like going back to the original equation. So like I always kind of found this experience that like if your book was like close to $9 or something like that, there's this thought I've always had to say, price it at 8, you're more likely to sell it than say at 10, or vice versa. Like if it's 5 but you ask for 6, like that there's this sort of like uneven breaking of numbers that kind of helps. Like in my mind it helps. Like if somebody says, well, it's only $8, not $10. It's $12, which is like a little bit more than 10. Like that's kind of sort of thinking like that. Have you thought about that or seen that? And I guess maybe to tie in another sort of thing was like getting your work priced within a point that seems relatable, that you don't want to be like an outlier. And I guess that's probably just do your research and see what other people are pricing similar things at. But like, I guess maybe, especially when you're starting out, you're kind of like, I don't think I'm worthy of a price point, so I price lower. And I guess what's the casualty of that, or you know, going too low versus too high? Like, can you talk maybe about sort of that psychology or that balance that you found in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my experience, I feel as though pricing things based on a specific dollar amount, like currency, yeah, like I would rather have something priced at $5 because there's a $5 bill, right? Like I would rather have something priced at $10 because there's a $10 bill. It's much easier for somebody to give you a 20 and, you know, quickly do that math and get back, you know, equal to 5. That being said, Wine Ghost, all of the Wine Ghosts are $4 because I wanted to have different things at different price points at my table. I feel like that's also important for accessibility, and does lead to more sales. There are a lot of people who are like, oh, well, you know, I really, really like your work, but I can't afford X or I can't afford Y. It is up to you as a creator to provide something that is within their price range. So I have tiny one-page zines that are all like just tiny original stories that I do. No staples. It's one of the, fold, cut in the middle zines that are all for $1. And I've any time somebody said, "Oh, I can't afford your work," and I point out that I have things available for $1, they'll get that. It's really, really surprising how much an invitation will help somebody kind of feel okay about getting things. Does that make sense? $8 versus $10. To me, it again depends on the convention. If it is a one-day convention, I say like, yes, that $8. Because it's, I don't really think about competition that much. I don't really look at like how retrofit prices their work or how like Iron Circus prices their anthologies. Generally speaking, wholesale prices are half of your retail price, and you still want to make a slight profit on your wholesale prices. So you usually end up pricing your things double or a little more than double the production cost. I know that math is kind of backwards. And to me, whatever price you get with that is the price you get. Offering bundle deals is another really good way to make something seem a little more accessible and appealing, even though you're not taking that much of a loss. So say you have a series, say like, okay, I have 2 volumes of Sweaty Palms, right? And each is 25. Instead of doing 2 for 50, I can do 2 for 45 and still make a pretty decent profit. Or even like 2 for 48, right? That doesn't seem as good as 45, of course. But it's definitely one way to like make a sale of 2 books rather than 1 while still not losing a profit on one of those books. You're of course going to see like that $5 quote unquote loss. But like I said, like once I spend a certain amount on production, that money is gone, it's investing in yourself. And that's just a huge part of having a career in comics in general, is building up that self-esteem. It's, really, really important to believe in yourself and the work you're doing. Otherwise, why would somebody else? And I know it's difficult, like building confidence in your work is difficult. And there are going to be days where you're like, this is trash, it's not happening today. Oh, well, maybe that's a sign that it's time to take a break, take a second to yourself. It is okay to rest. Absolutely. It is okay to, spend a day not drawing. I feel like as a creator, I go really hard for like a few days. I don't burn out. I just I'm like, okay, I'm having a bad inking day today, probably because I'm working so much. I'm going to take a break, come back to that page 2 days later, get pumped again to work on comics, and do another week of like doing pages consistently. It's that, but with confidence. Acknowledging that not every day you're going to be your own biggest fan. That's totally fine. Odds are you're the most harsh person on your work. That's important to remember as well. Is, like I said about Wine Ghost, I thought it was probably the worst comic I made. And, I never pictured her being a success at all whatsoever. And people ended up loving her. So, you know, just do what you think is fun. And I think doing what you think is fun will inherently help you build confidence in your work. Price wise and how you price your self-worth, it's to me that's so fruitless, because your self-worth is more like, how do I phrase this? You are worth more than your production, period. Like, you're worth way more than anyone could ever pay. And it's important to remember that. That's why when I do, you know, pricing, I provide those math equations, because it takes your personal value out of the equation. Your personal value has nothing to do with, or should have nothing to do with, how you price your work. That's my belief. It should be focused more on your profit margin, your cost of production, and, you know, how accessible do you want this work to be from a financial standpoint? Yeah. I hope that helps.
Cool. I think we have time for one more question if anybody has
Yeah.
a good.
Last
I've got one if nobody else does.
question.
Sure.
So in talking about accessibility and price and things along those lines, I guess, do you, and this may relate more towards non-story things than story things, how do you, I guess, do you, sorry, I should have articulated this in my head.
No, you're totally good.
Is there anything that you don't worry, I guess, yeah, is there anything that you don't worry about price accessibility for, because you're like, well, this is a niche thing, or this is a, this isn't necessarily some, like, I know that with a lot of your work, you are imparting something to the recipient. And I guess, is there something where you're like, well, this, I guess in my sense, I'm like, does this have no,
yeah, it's like
educational or emotional component, and therefore I don't have to feel bad about, that's sort of my take. I'm curious as to whether or not that the price accessibility, if that ever doesn't become an issue, or if there's a non-issue for like a physical copy, but digital copies are readily available, or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it like,
if you can make heads or tails
on what it is. Yeah, it totally depends on what it is, because, you know, that is based on my value of the work and not the potential audience value of the work. Something like, so I have a little Wine Ghost figurine that's a vinyl figure, a soft vinyl figure. That's something that, like, the price is firm. You know, there's, of course, like, I could price it for cheaper, but the profit margin on that is so tiny already because of the production cost that I'm like, all right, that's the price. That's the end of it. Sorry, y'all. Like, there are certain points where it's like, okay, you know, on this big production item, I am not making X amount of profit from it. This has to be this price in order for me to not accept it as a loss, even though it's something fun that I wanted to do for myself. So there are certain, definitely more so with physical objects, I feel like I'm a little loosey-goosey with comics specifically, where if somebody's like, oh, I'm $2 short, or I'm a few dollars short for this copy of Sweaty Palms at a convention, I'll be like, I got you, that's fine. It's definitely a case-by-case basis for me. There's nothing that, and I'm also talking from the point of, like, I am not published physically by another company yet. I haven't experienced the, oh, well, there's this price tag on it and I'm selling it for this much. I haven't experienced that yet. But I feel like I would honestly do the same, regardless of the content of the individual comic. Because even if I don't have something particularly educational in it, I cannot project an emotional value on the work to another person. I cannot tell, like, I can't assume the kind of emotional value that my comics will have on another person. And so, yeah, with a longer project, even something like I Am Not a Wolf, where I only did the illustrations. I don't include all the illustrations on my website because it is a physical novel, and I feel like looking at an illustrations in a novel specifically is part of the joys of getting a novel. And I don't want those who got the novel to feel like that joy is taken from them because they checked out my website first or something like that. Does that make sense? It's really on such a case-by-case basis. Sorry, I'm reading the chat. Yeah, so I mean, things like commissions and original art that don't have as high production costs but have high profit margins, completely up to you, honestly. I have seen prints that are postcards go for, like, postcard size, go for $5 at $1. I've seen them go for $15. It just really depends on you as an individual. Personally, I do not price things that high unless there's something particularly special about that individual print. For example, if the print is a lenticular print, one of those prints where, like, you shake them and they change, like, that has a higher production cost than a regular print and should be priced higher accordingly. Otherwise, you're creating, because lenticular prints, for example, like, aren't as common as in conventions, you are creating a standard by pricing it low that isn't realistic to the production cost. But for something like you just printed them out off a color printer on, like, some okay paper, it's not the best paper, but you put a lot of work into the image, that is completely up to you. I don't think, with how varied the price ranges are for prints, that there is inherently, like, a high cap or a low cap. I think that's completely open. Same thing with originals, honestly. I'm very detached from my originals. I tend to either donate them to raffles or ask my friends if they want them. I'm very like, oh, I did the work. That's what I wanted to do. Okay, bye-bye. I would, my partners actually rescued a few originals from the trash before, including the whole first Wine Ghost mini comic. I was going to throw it away, all the originals. And he was like, please don't do that. So it depends on, what you value that end product of work as versus how much you enjoyed the process of making it. I feel like if I hated making it but I like how it turned out, I will, price it a little higher for the effort that I put into it. if I loved making it, but like it's not the best in the world, I'll price it a little lower because I'm like, oh, well, you know, I loved it, but not everybody else will. Yeah, it's completely up to interpretation. And that's kind of the hard thing when it comes to pricing, right? Is it can be so wildly varied dependent on production costs, your self-esteem, your, you know, industry clout, as it were. I personally don't believe industry clout should have anything to do with how you price your work. I believe that's a bunch of baloney. I think people will be more willing to pay for like higher, you know, oh, this person was in so and so. Ooh, well, I'll pay, you know, this amount if they're, you know, richy rich money bags. But I personally believe that's a bunch of baloney. You can be only somebody who self-publishes and still knock around with the best of them price-wise. Like I don't think your resume, your publishing resume has anything to do with the overall quality of what you're selling, you know? I know that's kind of a tangent. I get into tangents a lot. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
Great. I think that is a great place to end things. Thank you so much, Sage. That was really fantastic.
Oh, thank goodness. I'm always worried I'm saying gibberish.
Oh, no. I certainly learned a lot, and I hope other people did as well. I've just pasted a link to Sage's website as well as to Sweaty Palms Anthology, and also to Radiator Comics Studio events. I did want to share, we have one more event coming up in April, or one more panel coming up in April, and that is the future of comics. So this Tuesday, April 27th at 8 p.m. Eastern, Layla Abdelrazak, Zach Clemente, Lawrence Lindell, and Carter Monier will be in conversation about the work that they do as publishers and organizers to build a small press comics community that they want to see. And then every Friday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern, we host Open Studio, which is a quiet work time for you to work on your comics in the presence of others. And we still have copies of the Sun and Sand comic anthology, which Radiator Comics co-published with Black Jose Press. It features 10 wonderful comics about South Florida. And if you go to sunsandcomics.wordpress.com, you can read them for free online. You can download a PDF version of it, or you can request a physical copy. And if you cover the shipping and handling, we will mail a copy to you. So information and links for the events and for Sun and Sand Anthology are available at radiatorcomics.com/studio. Sage, thank you so much for doing this presentation.
Yeah.
And
oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, for sure.
It's always such a joy to see the community. Like sincerely, I am always just floored at how beautiful comics is. I don't know. I'm a big sap.
No, it is really great to see everybody here. Thank you everyone for joining us and for the great questions and for the lively chat. So yeah, have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.